I used to believe that love was unconditional, especially between a mother and her children. Spent 30 years proving that belief, sacrificing my career, my savings, my health, and sometimes my sanity to give them everything they needed. When my hands started shaking and the doctors used words like degenerative, I thought they'd rally around me the way I always had for them. Instead, my phone grew quiet. My doorbell stopped ringing. The house that once echoed with their laughter became a museum of memories I was left to tend alone. But here's what they didn't expect. I wasn't going to beg. What would you do if the people you loved most simply disappeared when you needed them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cottage sits like a weathered pearl against the Maine coastline. Its gray shingles softened by decades of salt, air, and countless storms. I bought this place with Gerald 42 years ago when we were young and foolish enough to believe that love and determination could overcome anything. The ivy that now crawls up the eastern wall was just a handful of hopeful shoots then, planted the same spring Laura was born, from my kitchen window. Oh, I can see the rocky outcropping where Gerald proposed, where we later scattered his ashes, and where I now sit most mornings with my coffee, watching the tide come and go with the reliability I once thought I could count on from my children. The water never disappoints. It shows up twice a day, every day, regardless of weather or season or whether anyone is there to witness it. The house holds 13 years of family life in its bones. There's the chip in the hardwood floor where Milo dropped his guitar during a particularly enthusiastic practice session at 14. The pencil marks on the doorframe to the pantry still track all three children's heights through their growing years. Each line a tiny celebration of another inch conquered. Tessa's finger paintings, long since faded but never painted over, peek through the kitchen wallpaper I've been meaning to replace for a decade in the living room. Built-in bookshelves stretch from floor to ceiling, filled with the collected wisdom of 2 lifetimes. Gerald's philosophy texts share space with my art history volumes. Children's books we read together as a family nestled between poetry, collections, and cookbooks, stained with evidence of countless family dinners. The leather armchair by the fireplace still bears the impression of Gerald's body, though he's been gone 19 years now. I was 25 when I opened the Coastal Gallery downtown. A brave venture for a young woman in 1984. The gallery became my second child, really, a place where I nurtured emerging artists and helped them find their voices. I understood the vulnerability of putting your creation into the world, hoping someone would see its value. The irony isn't lost on me now. Gerald and I built something beautiful together before his heart gave out at 46. One moment he was reading the paper over breakfast, commenting on the local election results, and the next he was gone. No warning, no goodbye, no chance to prepare. The children were 17, 14, and 11, still so young, still needing their father's steady presence and terrible jokes. I became both parents overnight, juggling the gallery, 3 grieving children, and my own shattered heart. Laura stepped up immediately, trying to fill the role of the responsible adult, carrying burdens no 17-year-old should bear. Milo withdrew into his music, spending hours in the basement with his guitar, playing melancholy melodies that echoed all our hearts. Tessa, the baby, clung to me with a desperation that broke me a little more each day. The gallery suffered during those first few years. I couldn't focus on exhibitions and artist statements when my children needed rides to school, help with homework, someone to sit up with them when nightmares came, stole fewer pieces, took on fewer artists, and gradually watched my professional world shrink to accommodate my family's needs. But we made it work. Somehow, we made it work. I taught Laura to drive in the gallery's parking lot after hours. I attended every one of Milo's school concerts, even when they fell on opening nights. I helped Tessa with her science fair projects at the kitchen table, surrounded by the paperwork I'd brought home from the gallery. The summers were magical. We'd spend entire days on the beach, building elaborate sandcastles and hunting for sea glass. I taught them to recognize the difference between the calls of terns and gulls, showed them how to predict the weather by watching the horizon. Gerald's absence was always there, a missing note in our family symphony, but we learned to play around it. Lara excelled academically, driven by a fierce ambition that both impressed and worried me. She got into Harvard on a partial scholarship, though I still had to take out a second mortgage on the house to cover her remaining expenses. I closed the gallery during her sophomore year, selling the space to help fund her law school dreams. The day I handed over the keys, I told myself it was an investment in her future. In all their futures. Milo chose music over academics, much to Lara's vocal disapproval. He got his teaching degree from the State University, staying close to home, helping me with repairs around the house and keeping me company during those quiet years when Lara was building her career in Boston and Tessa was finding herself through a series of artistic phases in Portland. Tessa, my free spirit, tried everything: photography, poetry, jewelry making, food blogging. Each passion burned bright and brief, leaving behind abandoned supplies and half-finished projects that I packed away carefully just in case she returned to them. She moved to California 5 years ago, chasing what she called her authentic self and documenting the journey on social media platforms I barely understood. For years, I was the center around which they orbited. Holiday gatherings happened at my house. Family crises were brought to my kitchen table. When Lara's engagement fell apart, she came home and cried in my arms for 3 days. When Milo struggled with unemployment after budget cuts eliminated his position, I helped him financially and emotionally until he found his footing again. When Tessa needed funds for her latest venture, I was the first person she called. I thought I was building something lasting, something that would endure beyond my physical presence. I thought the love I poured into them would create unbreakable bonds, the kind that deepen rather than weaken under pressure. The first symptoms appeared 3 years ago. Just small things at first. A tremor in my left hand when I was tired, occasional. Difficulty with balance, words that sometimes got tangled on their way from my brain to my mouth. I told myself it was normal aging, stress, too much coffee. I was 58 and had been carrying the weight of responsibility alone for nearly 2 decades. Of course, my body was showing signs of wear, but the symptoms persisted and gradually worsened. The tremor became more frequent, more noticeable. I started dropping things: coffee cups, books, my cell phone. The woman who had once hung delicate paintings with steady hands now struggled to thread a needle or write a check without my signature. Looking like a child scrawl. Dr. Morrison, who had been my physician since Tessa's birth, referred me to a neurologist in Portland. The tests were extensive and expensive. Mr. Is, blood work, electrical studies that made my muscles jump involuntarily. The waiting was the worst part. 3 weeks of uncertainty while I continued to pretend everything was normal. When the diagnosis came, it felt both devastating and oddly relieving to finally have a name for what was happening to my body. Parkinson's disease, early onset, with a progression rate that would likely be gradual but inevitable. Dr. Chen, a neurologist, explained it all with careful compassion. The medication options, the physical therapy recommendations, the lifestyle changes that might slow the decline. I drove home from that appointment in a daze, my mind struggling to process the enormity of what lay ahead. The woman who had prided herself on independence, who had raised 3 children alone and run a successful business, was facing a future where simple tasks might become impossible challenges. That evening, I called each of my children to share the news. Lara's response was immediate and practical: research into the best specialists, recommendations for second opinions, a barrage of questions about treatment options. Milo was quiet, thoughtful, asking how I was feeling emotionally more than focusing on medical details. Tessa cried, which surprised me, and promised to research holistic treatments and dietary changes that might help. For a few months, Their attention felt like a warm blanket wrapped around my fears. Laura sent articles about new research developments. Milo called every few days to check in. Tessa shipped packages of supplements and herbal teas from California, each one accompanied by a handwritten note about how much she loved me. I began to believe that this diagnosis might actually bring us closer together, that my vulnerability might awaken their protective instincts the way their childhood scrapes and disappointments had awakened mine. I imagined family dinners where they took turns cooking. Grandchildren who would remember their grandmother not for her shaking hands but for her stories and her laugh. But gradually, subtly, the attention began to fade. Laura's calls became more focused on logistics than connection, brief check-ins about medication schedules and doctor appointments. Milo's visits grew less frequent as his new teaching position demanded more time and energy. Tessa's packages arrived less often, and her social media posts showed her immersed in a new relationship and a new business venture that required her complete focus. That the house grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of independence. It was the hollow quiet of abandonment. The tide still came in twice a day, but I was the only one there to witness it. The invitation had been sent 3 weeks in advance. Thanksgiving 2023 at my house, as it had been every year since Gerald died. I spent days planning the menu, ordering the organic turkey Laura preferred, making sure to have the gluten-free stuffing Tessa required for her latest dietary restriction, and preparing Milo's favorite sweet potato casserole with the brown sugar crumble topping he'd loved since childhood. I cleaned the house with a thoroughness that exhausted me, my hands shaking more than usual from the exertion. The good china came down from the highest shelf, each piece carefully washed and polished. I arranged the fall centerpiece I'd made from the last of the season's asters and the red maple leaves that had drifted down from the ancient tree by the front gate. The dining room table was set for 6. Myself, the 3 children, plus Laura's new boyfriend Marcus, whom I'd been eager to meet, and Sarah, Milo's girlfriend of 2 years, who felt like the daughter I'd never had. I'd even bought wine, something I rarely did anymore since the medication made alcohol inadvisable. But I wanted everything to be perfect. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Laura's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the excitement of a final detail to coordinate, perhaps a question about timing or what she could bring. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but we're not going to make it Thursday." Her voice had that brisk, professional tone she used when delivering bad news to clients. Marcus's family decided to do a last-minute gathering in the Hamptons, and it's important for our relationship that I meet his extended family. I stood in my kitchen looking at the grocery bags I'd just unpacked, the turkey already thawing in the refrigerator. "But sweetheart, we've had this plan for weeks. I've already bought everything." "I know, and I feel terrible about the timing. But this is really important for my future, Mom. You understand that, right? Maybe we can do a dinner the weekend after." Before I could respond, she was already moving on. "I have to run to a meeting, but I'll call you Friday to see how your day went. Give Milo and Tessa my love." The line went dead before I could tell her that I loved her, too. Before I could ask about the weekend dinner she'd mentioned before, I could voice the disappointment that was already settling like a stone in my chest. An hour later, Milo called. His voice was gentler, apologetic in a way that somehow made it worse. "Mom, I'm really sorry, but Sarah's parents invited us to their cabin for Thanksgiving. Her dad hasn't been well, and they think this might be his last holiday season, where he's really himself." I understood that reasoning in a way that cut deep. I knew about last holiday seasons, about time running out, about the precious nature of family gatherings when health becomes uncertain. How could I argue with that logic without sounding selfish? "Of course, honey, family comes first." The words tasted bitter even as I spoke them. "Sarah's family needs you. Maybe we can drive down Friday evening just for dessert. I could bring that apple pie you like from the bakery downtown." "That would be nice," I said, Though we both knew Friday evening would become Saturday morning. Okay, and Saturday morning would become next weekend, and next weekend would fade into a vague promise of soon. Tessa's text came Wednesday morning. Mom, so sorry, but my flight got canceled due to weather, and everything else is booked solid through Sunday. Thanksgiving travel is insane, but I'm sending you so much love and gratitude today. You're the most amazing mom ever. I stared at the message for a long time, noting how she'd managed to make her absence sound like an inconvenience rather than a choice. How the heart emojis were supposed to substitute for actual presence. I checked the weather reports for California. Clear skies, no travel advisories. Thursday morning arrived, gray and drizzly. The kind of November day that makes you want to stay under blankets with a good book. I stood in my kitchen, looking at the turkey that would feed 8 people easily, and made a decision that surprised me. I wasn't going to cook for just myself. I wasn't going to sit alone at a table set for 6, eating leftovers for the next 2 weeks while pretending this was just a small change in plans instead. I called Deborah, my neighbor, who I knew was spending the holiday alone since her daughter lived overseas. Then I called Mrs. Chen from the library, whose husband had passed the previous spring. I reached out to Tom Morrison, a widower from my book club who'd mentioned having nowhere to go by noon. My dining room table was full again, but with a different kind of family. We were all over 60, all carrying our own stories of loss and adaptation. All grateful for company and good food and the simple pleasure of not being alone on a day designed for togetherness. Deborah brought her famous cranberry sauce and a wicked sense of humor that had us all laughing until our sides hurt. Mrs. Chen shared stories about her late husband's terrible cooking attempts and his sweet attempts to learn Chinese phrases to impress her parents. Tom entertained us with tales from his 40 years as a postal worker, including the time he had to deliver a marriage proposal hidden inside what appeared to be a package from the IRS. As I looked around the table at these faces, weathered by time and experience, but bright with laughter and connection, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine joy. These people had shown up not because they had to, not because of obligation or duty, but because they chose to. Because they understood that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about showing up. But later that evening, after my guests had gone home and I was washing dishes alone in the kitchen, the reality of my children's absence hit me with full force. I found myself crying over the gravy boat, tears that came from some deep well of disappointment I'd been trying to keep sealed. This wasn't about one missed holiday. This was about a pattern that had been building for months, a gradual pulling, a way that I'd been making excuses for because the alternative was too painful to accept. When I really needed them, when my body was betraying me and my future felt uncertain. They had found reasons to be elsewhere. I thought about all the times I'd rearranged my life for their needs. The gallery events I'd missed for their school, plays, the relationships I'd never pursued because they needed me. The opportunities I declined because they came first. Always, they came first. Had I raised them to be selfish, or had I simply made myself so available that my absence felt inconsequential? Had my unconditional love taught them that my love would always be there, regardless of how little they offered in return? That night, I sat in Gerald's chair by the fireplace, looking at the family photos arranged on the mantel. Pictures of birthdays and graduations, Christmas mornings and beach vacations. All the moments that had seemed so important when they were happening. In every picture, I was there, usually in the background, often taking the photos, always present for their milestones and memories. I picked up the most recent family photo taken 2 Christmases ago when everyone had managed to come home. We looked happy in that picture, gathered around the tree, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. But looking at it now, I noticed something I'd missed before. I was the one holding everyone together, literally and figuratively. My arms were around 2 of them, my body positioned to bridge the small gaps between their chosen positions. What would happen to that carefully constructed harmony? by stop being the one holding everyone in place. What would our family look like if I stopped initiating the calls, planning the gatherings, making all the effort to maintain our connections? I was about to find out. The phone rang twice over the weekend. Laura called Friday evening as promised, but our conversation was brief and distracted. She was tired from travel, she said, and Marcus's family had been a lot to handle. She asked about my Thanksgiving in the cursory way people ask about the weather, clearly expecting a simple answer. It was lovely, I told her. I had dinner with some friends. Oh, good, she said, already moving on. I'm glad you found something to do. Something to do. As if my Thanksgiving dinner was a hobby I'd picked up to pass the time. Rather than a necessary reimagining of my life because my family had abandoned me, Milo texted Saturday morning, "Hope you had a good Thanksgiving." Sarah's dad really appreciated having us there. Maybe we can get together next weekend. Tessa's call came Sunday, full of dramatic apologies and promises to make it up to me during her Christmas visit. But even as she spoke, I could hear the distance in her voice. The way she was already moving on to her next story, her next adventure, her next excuse. As I hung up from Tessa's call, I walked to the dining room and looked at the table where I'd shared such a beautiful meal with my chosen family 3 days earlier. The morning lights streamed through the windows, illuminating the empty chairs and the small scuff marks on the hardwood floor where countless family dinners had taken place. That's when I made my first decision. I took down the family photo from the mantel, the one where I was holding everyone together, and I placed it face down in the drawer of the side table. I wasn't ready to put it away completely, but I wasn't ready to look at it anymore either. The second decision came more slowly, building over the following weeks as December arrived and Christmas plans began to take shape. Phone calls became less frequent. Visit promises remained vague. My children's lives continued to expand and flourish while I felt increasingly like a fading afterthought, someone they'd check in with when it was convenient, someone they'd visit when nothing better was available. I started paying attention to the pattern with the clarity that comes from stopping the effort to make excuses. They called when they needed something, advice about a work situation, a recommendation for a restaurant in Portland, the name of the contractor who had fixed my roof. But when I called just to hear their voices, to share a funny story or ask about their lives, the conversations felt obligatory, rushed, something to be gotten through rather than enjoyed. By Christmas, I knew what I had to do. Not in anger, not in hurt, but in the clear-eyed recognition that love should be mutual, that family relationships require effort from all parties, and that I deserved better than to spend my remaining healthy years begging for crumbs of attention from the people I'd given everything to. The decision felt both earth-shaking and perfectly natural, like finally acknowledging a truth I'd been avoiding for months. I wasn't going to chase them anymore. I wasn't going to make excuses for their absence or pretend that being forgotten was acceptable. As long as it was convenient for them, I was going to take back my dignity, my self-respect, and my future. And I was going to do it so quietly that they'd never see it coming. December arrived with the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you question every life choice that led you to a place where winter feels personal. I'd always loved the Maine coast in winter, the stark beauty of snow against dark water, the way the lighthouse beams seemed more urgent cutting through the shorter days. But this year, the cold felt different. It felt like loneliness given weather form. Christmas preparations had always been my symphony. By the first week of December, I'd typically have gifts ordered and wrapped. The house decorated with a garland I made from the balsam fir on the back corner of the property, cookies baked and frozen in careful containers marked for each child's favorites. This year, I found myself sitting in the living room on December 8th, staring at the bare mantel where stockings should have been hanging, feeling utterly disconnected from the woman who had orchestrated 38 previous holiday celebrations. The phone rang less frequently now. When it did, conversations felt stilted, performative. Laura called to discuss her promotion at the firm, speaking for 20 minutes about billable hours and partnership tracks without asking how I was managing the increasing stiffness in my joints. Milo sent texts about his student's Christmas concert, including a photo of himself conducting, but didn't mention whether he'd be coming home for the holidays. Tessa posted daily Instagram stories about her new apartment in Oakland, her yoga, teacher training, her latest business venture selling handmade candles with names like Awakened Goddess and Manifested Dreams. I watched their lives unfold from a distance, like studying paintings in a gallery where I wasn't allowed to get close enough to read the artist statements. The knitting needles felt foreign in my hands now, the tremor making stitches uneven and frustrating. I'd started a scarf for Lara in October, a complex cable pattern in the deep burgundy she'd always favored. She'd worn my knitted gifts throughout law school, often mentioning how her classmates envied her handmade scarves and sweaters. But now, holding the half-finished piece, I couldn't remember why I'd thought she'd want another. When had I become someone whose gifts were appreciated but not necessary, whose presence was nice but not essential? When had my children's lives become so full that there wasn't room for the person who had created the foundation for everything they'd built? I set the knitting aside and instead focused on the small daily routines that had become my anchors. Morning coffee by the kitchen window, watching the harbor seals that had taken up residence near the rocks. The careful exercises Dr. Chen had prescribed to maintain flexibility and balance. Reading in the afternoons when the light was best and my hands were steadiest. It was during one of these reading sessions that Noelle first appeared at my door. The home health agency had called the previous week, explaining that Medicare would cover periodic visits from a nurse practitioner to monitor my condition and help with medication management. I'd reluctantly agreed, imagining some efficient professional who would check boxes on a clipboard and leave me with a stack of pamphlets about living well with Parkinson's. Instead, Noelle Chavez knocked on my door that Tuesday morning like sunshine taking human form. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that actually focused on my face when I spoke, rather than darting around looking for problems to solve. Mrs. Frank Du. I'm Noelle from Coastal Home Health. I hope this is still a good time. I'd forgotten she was coming, which embarrassed me more than I wanted to admit. The house was cluttered with books and newspapers, dirty coffee cups marking my path through the day. I looked like exactly what? I was a woman who'd stopped making effort because no one was coming to see the results. Of course. Please come in. I'm sorry about the mess. What mess? She said, stepping inside and looking around with genuine curiosity rather than professional assessment. This house is beautiful. How long have you lived here? Something in her tone, interested rather than polite, made me pause. When was the last time someone had asked me a question because they actually wanted to know the answer? 42 years. We bought it when I was pregnant with my oldest daughter. My husband Gerald and I, he died 19 years ago. Nodded with the kind of sympathy that felt real rather than rehearsed. That must have been so hard, especially with children. It was, but we managed. As she checked my blood pressure and reviewed my medications, we talked about the house, the town, the changes we'd both seen over the years. She'd grown up in foster care in Portland, she told me, aging out of the system at 18 and putting herself through nursing school. She'd moved to this coastal town 6 months ago, drawn by the slower pace and the beauty of the ocean. I've never lived anywhere where I could see water from my apartment window, she said, adjusting the blood pressure cuff. Sometimes I just sit and watch the waves for hours. Is that weird? Not weird at all? I do the same thing for my kitchen every morning. She stayed longer than necessary, asking about the books scattered around the living room, admiring the art on the walls, listening to my stories about the gallery I'd run for 20 years. When she left, she said something that stayed with me for the rest of the day. I hope it's okay if I look forward to our next visit. You're the most interesting person I've met since moving here. Interesting. When was the last time one of my children had found me interesting rather than worrying or disappointing or inconvenient? That evening, I found myself looking around the house with fresh eyes, seeing it the way Noelle had seen it, as a place full of beauty and history rather than a museum of better times. The paintings I'd collected over the years, the books that had shaped my thinking, the carefully chosen furniture that had weathered decades of family life, all of it suddenly felt valuable again, worth maintaining and sharing. I also found myself thinking about Noelle's story, the resilience it must have taken to build a life from nothing. To choose service and caring as a profession when she could have easily chosen bitterness or self-protection. There was something in her presence that reminded me of myself at her age, determined, hopeful, willing to invest in other people even when the returns weren't guaranteed. Over the following weeks, as Noelle's visits became a regular part of my routine, I began to notice how different these interactions felt from my phone calls with my children. She asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned in previous visits. She remembered details about my past that I'd shared casually, the name of my favorite artist, the story about Gerald's proposal, my concerns about the increasing tremor in my left hand. More importantly, she seemed to value my opinions and experience. When she mentioned struggling with a difficult patient, she asked how I'd handled challenging people during my gallery days. When she was considering applying for a more advanced nursing program, she wanted my thoughts on balancing career advancement with personal life. She treated me like someone whose judgment mattered. Insights were worth seeking. The contrast with my children's interactions became increasingly stark. Laura called less frequently, and when she did, she seemed impatient with my slower speech and occasional need to repeat myself. Milo's visits, when they happened, felt obligatory duty calls to check on the aging mother. Tessa's communications remained limited to sporadic texts and social media messages that required no response and offered no real connection. But it was the Christmas planning conversation with Laura that crystallized everything. She called on December 18th, her voice bright with the efficiency of someone checking items off a to-do list. "Mom, I wanted to talk about Christmas. Marcus and I are going to his family's place in Aspen this year. It's a huge family reunion. They only do every few years. But I was thinking maybe we could do our celebration when I get back, maybe New Year's weekend." I sat in Gerald's chair, looking out at the gray December ocean, feeling something shift inside me, like tectonic plates, finding a new configuration. What about Milo and Tessa? Well, Milo said he and Sarah are going to her family's place again. Apparently, it's becoming a tradition. And Tessa is doing some kind of yoga retreat in Costa Rica. So it would just be you and me anyway. And honestly, it might be nice to have a quieter celebration. Less stressful, you know? Less stressful. As if our family gatherings had become a burden rather than a joy. Something to be managed rather than cherished. Mom, are you there? I'm here. New Year's weekend sounds fine, but even as I said it, I knew I didn't mean it. Nothing about this sounded fine. Nothing about being an afterthought in my children's holiday plans felt acceptable anymore. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Deborah. "How are you holding up, honey?" she asked, and I could hear the genuine concern in her voice. "I think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis," I said. "Except I'm 61, so maybe it's more of a late-life awakening." She laughed, the sound warm and reassuring. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the lonely Thanksgiving, about the children's Christmas plans that didn't include me, about how invisible I'd started to feel in my own family. I told her about Noelle and how refreshing it was to have someone actually listen to my stories. I told her about the half-finished scarf that I'd probably never complete because I wasn't sure the recipient would even notice. "Oh, honey," Deborah said when I finished, "you know what this is, don't you?" "What?" "This is you finally seeing clearly. Those kids of yours have gotten so comfortable with you being the reliable one, the one who's always there, that they've forgotten you're a person with your own needs and feelings. But they're busy, Deborah. They have their own lives." "Bullshit," she said. And her bluntness made me laugh despite everything. Being busy is an excuse, not a reason. You think their fancy careers and relationships are more important than the Woman who sacrificed everything to give them the foundation for those lives. I didn't answer, but we both knew the question was rhetorical. Kostya, what would Gerald say if he could see how they're treating you? That question hit me like a physical blow. Gerald had been quiet, thoughtful, never one for dramatic gestures or emotional outbursts. But he'd also been fiercely protective of his family, and he'd had no patience for selfishness or ingratitude. He'd be furious, I said quietly. Damn right. He would. And what would he tell you to do about it? I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Gerald had always believed in quiet strength, in actions rather than words, in letting people show you who they really were and then believing them. He'd also believed in dignity, in never begging for what should be freely given. The next morning, I made two decisions. The first was small but felt significant. I put the unfinished scarf away in the closet, along with the yarn I'd bought for Milo's sweater and the baby blanket I'd started for the grandchildren. That might never come. The second decision was larger, though I didn't fully understand its implications yet. I called my lawyer, Harold Peterson, who'd handled Gerald's estate and had been asking me for years to update my will. Harold, it's Kostya Frankdu. I think it's time we had that conversation. About my estate planning. Wonderful, he said. How about next week? We can go over everything. Make sure your wishes are clearly documented. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, I'd like to start from scratch. I want to completely rewrite my will. There was a pause. Is everything all right, Kostya? Everything's fine. I'm just seeing things more clearly these days. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of agency, of control over my own narrative. For too long, I'd been reacting to my children's choices, adjusting my expectations to accommodate their diminishing interest in our family. But I had choices too, and it was time I started making them. The woman who had built a business from nothing, who had raised 3 children alone, who had survived loss and illness and disappointment. That woman was still inside me. She'd just been dormant, waiting for me to remember that love doesn't require martyrdom. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's selfishness. I was about to rediscover just how powerful quiet decisions could be. January arrived like a blank page, offering the possibility of new beginnings. The holidays had passed exactly as predicted. Laura postponed our New Year's celebration. Twice before suggesting we just catch up by phone, Milo sent a fruit basket with a generic card. And Tessa shared a single Instagram post from Costa Rica, featuring herself in warrior pose on a beach at sunrise. Tagged with #gratefulheart and #family, love you, I spent New Year's Eve with a cup of tea and a Patricia Highsmith novel, welcoming 2024 with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had stopped pretending disappointment was acceptable as long as it came with excuses. The appointment with Harold Peterson was scheduled for January 15th, a Wednesday morning when the winter light through his office windows felt honest rather than harsh. Harold had been Gerald's friend first, then our lawyer, and finally my trusted advisor through all the complexities of single motherhood and business ownership. He was 73 now, with white hair and reading glasses that perpetually perched on the end of his nose. And he had the rare gift of listening without judgment. His office hadn't changed in 20 years. Law books from floor to ceiling, a Persian rug worn soft by decades of client meetings, and photographs of his own family scattered across his desk like evidence of the life well lived that legal work could support but shouldn't define. Kostya, he said, rising to greet me with the careful courtesy of someone who understood that my movements had become more deliberate, my balance less certain. You look well? I feel well, I said, and realized I meant it. Despite the progression of my symptoms, despite the loneliness that had settled into my daily routine like a familiar house guest, I felt clearer and more purposeful than I had in months. We settled into the leather chairs across from his desk, And he opened the thick folder that contained the existing will. A document that divided my estate equally among my 3 children, with provisions for the house to be sold and the proceeds split. My savings and investments distributed according to a formula we'd worked out years earlier when such planning felt like a distant necessity. "Now then," Harold said, adjusting his glasses, "you mentioned wanting to make some changes. Are we talking about minor adjustments? Or would you like to reconsider the entire structure?" "It's the entire structure," I said, without hesitation. "I want to remove my children as beneficiaries completely." Harold's pen stopped moving across his legal pad. He looked at me with the careful attention of someone trying to determine if a client was speaking from clarity or confusion. "That's a significant change, Kostya. May I ask what's prompted this decision?" I'd prepared for this question during the sleepless hours of the previous few nights, rehearsing explanations that ranged from bitter recitations of their neglect to careful legal language about changing circumstances. But sitting in Harold's office, surrounded by the weight of legal precedent and the gravity of permanent decisions, I found myself speaking more simply than I planned. "They've forgotten I exist, Harold." Not dramatically, not with cruelty, just with the casual indifference of people who've gotten comfortable taking me for granted. When I needed them most, they found reasons to be elsewhere. I'm not angry about it. I'm clear about it. And I'm clear about what I want to do in response. He nodded slowly, making notes. "And what would you like to do with the estate instead?" "I want to leave everything to Noelle Chavez. She's a nurse from the home health agency, 29 years old, grew up in foster care. She's been taking care of me, really taking care of me, with no expectation of anything in return. Everything." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. "The house, the investments, the personal property, everything." Was quiet for a long moment. The only sound the scratch of his pen against paper and the distant hum of traffic on Main Street. "Kostya, I have to ask, and please don't take this as anything other than professional due diligence, but have you discussed this decision with anyone else? Your children, perhaps?" "Or no," I interrupted, "and I don't intend to. That's actually part of the point, Harold. This isn't about punishment or manipulation. This isn't a threat designed to change their behavior. This is simply a recognition that love and loyalty should be mutual, and when they're not, there are consequences." "What about a gradual approach? We could restructure the will to incentivize more involvement in your life or create contingencies." Based on Harold, my voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not interested in buying my children's love or attention. Spent 30 years earning it, and apparently that wasn't enough. I'm interested in giving my resources to someone who has already shown me what genuine care looks like." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the careful attention of someone who had seen many clients make decisions they later regretted. "Tell me about this young woman. How long have you known her?" 6 weeks, I said, and saw his expression shift. "I know how that sounds. But Harold, in 6 weeks, she's shown me more genuine interest and care than my children have in 6 months. She remembers what I tell her. She asks follow-up questions. She treats me like a person whose thoughts and experiences matter. 6 weeks is a very short time to base such a significant decision on." "Gerald proposed to me after knowing me for 2 months. I said, "Sometimes clarity comes quickly." Harold smiled at that, remembering perhaps his own stories of quick decisions that had shaped decades. "Fair point. But Gerald wasn't asking you to restructure your entire estate?" "No, he was asking me to restructure my entire life, which I did happily because I recognized something genuine when I saw it." We spent the next hour working through the practical details. Harold explained the legal requirements for such a change, the importance of documenting my mental competency, the advisability of including a detailed explanation of my reasoning to prevent potential challenges to the will. "Your children could contest this," he warned, "especially if they can argue that you weren't of sound mind when you made these changes." "Then we'll make sure there's no question about my mental state," I said. "I want a complete cognitive evaluation. medical documentation of my competency, whatever it takes to make this ironclad. And you're certain you don't want to leave them anything, not even a small token, or perhaps some of the family heirlooms that might have sentimental value. I thought about the photo albums and baby books, the handmade gifts and childhood artwork I'd saved for decades, the Christmas ornaments with their names painted in my careful script. Did they deserve these tangible memories of the love they'd chosen to take for granted? They can have the personal items with sentimental value, I said finally. Photo albums, they're childhood things, items that belong to their father, but nothing of monetary value. Nothing that I worked and saved to build. Harold made more notes, his expression thoughtful. I want you to take 2 weeks to think about this, Kostya. Not because I think you're wrong, but because decisions this significant deserve time and reflection. If you still feel the same way in 2 weeks, we'll proceed with drafting the new will. I'll feel the same way in 2 weeks, I said, but I appreciate your caution. As I drove home from Harold's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the satisfaction of taking action rather than simply enduring circumstances. The winter landscape looked different somehow, sharper and more beautiful. As if I was seeing it with new eyes. Noelle's next visit was scheduled for Thursday, and I found myself looking forward to it with an anticipation that felt almost youthful, not because of the secret I was carrying, but because of the genuine connection we developed. The easy conversation and mutual respect that made her presence in my house feel like a gift rather than a medical necessity. She arrived precisely on time, as always, stamping snow off her boots and unwinding a bright blue scarf that made her dark eyes even more striking. "How was your week?" she asked as she set up her equipment, and I realized she was the only person who asked that question as if she actually wanted to know the answer. "Productive," I said. "I had a meeting with my lawyer to update some paperwork." "Oh, that's smart. I keep meaning to write a will, but it seems so morbid when you're 29 and have basically nothing to leave anyone." "You have more than you think," I said, and she looked at me curiously. "Like what?" "You have the ability to make people feel seen and valued. You have genuine curiosity about other people's lives. You have the kind of presence that makes someone's day better just by showing up." She blushed, clearly uncomfortable with the compliment. "I'm just doing my job." "No," I said firmly. "You're doing your job and something more. There's a difference, and I recognize it because I spent years doing the same thing." As she checked my vital signs and reviewed my medication schedule, we talked about her week, a difficult patient who'd finally started to trust her, a nursing continuing education class she was considering, her attempts to make friends in a town where most people her age had already formed their social circles. "Years earlier, do you ever regret moving here?" I asked. "Leaving behind whatever connections you had in Portland?" She considered this while updating my chart. "No, not really. I didn't have many connections there anyway." Foster care doesn't exactly set you up for lasting relationships. You learn to be self-sufficient, but you also learn not to expect much from other people. That sounds lonely. 'Twas sometimes. But it also made me appreciate genuine kindness when I found it. Like this job, like our conversations. I don't take things like this for granted because I know how rare they are. I watched her face as she spoke, noting the way her expression combined acceptance with hope, resignation with resilience. She'd learned hard lessons about human nature, but they hadn't made her cynical or bitter. Instead, they'd given her the wisdom to recognize authentic connection when it appeared. "Noelle," I said impulsively, "would you like to stay for tea when you're finished? I have some of those shortbread cookies you mentioned liking." Her face lit up with surprised pleasure. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose on your afternoon." "You wouldn't be imposing? I'd enjoy the company." So we sat in my kitchen as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, drinking tea from my good china and talking about books and travel and dreams for the future. She told me about her hope to eventually become a nurse practitioner, maybe specialize in geriatric care. I told her about my gallery days, about the satisfaction of helping artists find their voices and their audiences. You must miss it, she said. Having that sense of purpose, of building something meaningful. I thought I'd found that purpose again in my children, I said carefully. But I'm learning that meaning has to come from within yourself. Other people can enhance it, but they can't create it for you. She nodded thoughtfully. That's a hard lesson. I'm still learning it myself. When she left an hour later, I stood at the kitchen window, watching her drive away, thinking about the conversation we'd just shared. This young woman, who'd had every reason to become guarded and cynical, had instead chosen openness and service. She'd taken the pain of abandonment and transformed it into empathy for others who were struggling. Meanwhile, my children, who'd been given every advantage and unconditional love, had gradually retreated into self-centered lives that left no room for the person who had created their foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me, and neither was the clarity it provided. That evening, I called Harold Peterson at home. Something I'd never done in 20 years of professional relationship. Harold, it's Costia. I'm sorry to call you at home, but I wanted you to know I won't need those 2 weeks to think. I'm certain about my decision. Costia, this isn't about anger or disappointment. Harold, this is about recognizing love when I see it and responding accordingly. I want to proceed with the new will as soon as possible. There was a long pause before he answered. All right, we'll schedule the cognitive evaluation for next week, and once we have that documentation, we'll draft the new will. But Costia? Yes. Hope you know what you're doing. I do, I said, and for the first time in months, I was absolutely certain I was telling the truth. I finally completely do. The cognitive assessment was scheduled for January 29th at Maine Medical Center in Portland. It's a gray brick building that managed to look both imposing and reassuring in the way that only well-established medical institutions can achieve. Dr. Sarah Patterson, the neuropsychologist Harold had recommended, had a reputation for thorough evaluations and unimpeachable professional standards, exactly what we needed to ensure my will would be legally bulletproof. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that conveyed competence and clarity. A navy wool dress that had served me well during gallery negotiations, low heels that were practical but dignified. The pearl earrings Gerald had given me for our 10th anniversary. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a thoughtful woman making deliberate choices about her future. The drive to Portland took an hour, winding through the coastal landscape I'd called home for 4 decades. As I navigated the familiar curves and hills, I found myself thinking about all the trips I'd made to the city over the years, taking the children to specialists when they were sick, driving to art exhibitions when I was building the gallery's reputation, rushing to the hospital when Gerald had his heart attack. Always, I'd been going to Portland for someone else's needs. Today, finally, I was going for my own. Dr. Patterson's office was on the 3rd floor, with windows that looked out over the Portland headlight. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a sensible ponytail and the kind of direct gaze that suggested both intelligence and compassion. Her handshake was firm, her manner professional but warm. Mrs. Frankdew, thank you for coming in today. I understand. You're requesting this evaluation in connection with estate planning decisions. That's correct. My lawyer wants to ensure there's no question about my mental competency when I execute my new will. She nodded, settling behind her desk with a thick folder of assessment materials. That's prudent planning. Can you tell me a bit about what's prompting the changes to your will? I'd rehearsed this answer, knowing it would be important to present my reasoning clearly and rationally. I'm reevaluating my relationships and making decisions based on who has actually shown care and support during my illness, rather than who I hope might show care in the future. I see. And you're comfortable with these decisions? Completely comfortable. They're the most clear-headed decisions I've made in years. The assessment itself was more comprehensive than I'd anticipated. Dr. Patterson tested my memory. asking me to recall word lists and repeat number sequences. She evaluated my problem-solving abilities with puzzles and pattern recognition exercises. She asked about my personal history, my current living situation, my understanding of my medical condition and prognosis. "Tell me about your daily routine," she said, making notes on a legal pad. "I wake around 6:30, have coffee while watching the harbor seals from my kitchen window. I do the exercises my physical therapist prescribed, then usually read for a few hours while my hands are steadiest. Afternoons, I might do light household tasks or run errands in town. Evenings, I read more or sometimes watch old movies." "You cook for yourself?" "Yes, though I've simplified my menus. I still enjoy cooking, but I'm more careful about using sharp knives when my hands are shaky." "How do you manage your medications?" "I have a weekly pill organizer that I fill every Sunday. My nurse practitioner, Noelle, checks it during her visits to make sure I'm managing correctly." "Tell me about Noelle." Something in her tone made me look up from the cognitive test I'd been working on. There was a quality of interest that went beyond routine questioning. "She's wonderful, smart, caring, genuinely interested in me as a person rather than just as a patient. She's become, well, I suppose you'd call her a friend, though that seems inadequate to describe what her presence has meant to me." "How long have you known her?" "About 2 months now." "I know that's not very long, but sometimes connections happen quickly when they're genuine." Dr. Patterson made more notes, and I found myself wondering what she was writing. Whether my obvious affection for Noelle was somehow problematic from a psychological standpoint? "Mrs. Frank Dew, I need to ask you some direct questions about your estate planning decisions. Are you making these changes because you hope to influence your children's behavior?" "No, I'm making them because I've realized their behavior is unlikely to change, and I'm responding accordingly." "Are you angry with your children?" I considered this carefully. I was angry initially, but anger requires energy I don't want to spend on people who've shown me their priorities. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just ... clear. If your children were to suddenly become more attentive, would you reconsider your will? No, because that attention would be motivated by financial interest rather than genuine care. The time for them to show genuine care was when I needed it most, and they chose not to. She asked more questions about my understanding of the financial implications of my decisions, my awareness of potential family conflicts, my consideration of alternative approaches. With each answer, I felt more confident that my reasoning was sound, my choices defensible. The assessment took 3 hours. When it was finished, Dr. Patterson reviewed her notes while I waited, studying the lighthouse visible from her window and thinking about all the storms it had weathered, all the ships it had guided safely to harbor. "Mrs. Frank Dew," she said finally, "I'm going to be completely frank with you. When your lawyer first contacted me about this evaluation, I was somewhat skeptical. Sudden changes to estate planning, especially involving relatively new relationships, often raise red flags about cognitive impairment or undue influence." My stomach tightened. And now, telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. Means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now, having spent time with you, I'm convinced you're making these decisions from a place of absolute clarity and sound judgment. Your cognitive function is excellent. Your reasoning is logical and well articulated. Most importantly, you demonstrate a clear understanding of the consequences of your choices and the motivations behind them. Relief flooded through me, like warm water. "So you'll provide the documentation Harold needs. I'll provide documentation that you are absolutely competent to make these estate planning decisions. In fact, I'd go further than that." She leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Frank Dew, in my professional opinion, you're making choices that demonstrate remarkable emotional intelligence and self-respect. Not everyone has the courage to stop accepting poor treatment just because it comes from family." I felt tears prick my eyes, unexpected and surprising. "Thank you." That means more than you know. There is one thing I want to mention, though. Something I noticed during our conversation that you might not be aware of. What's that? When you talk about Noelle, your entire demeanor changes. Your voice becomes warmer, your posture more relaxed. It's clear that this relationship has had a profound positive impact on your emotional well-being. She's been a gift, I said simply. I want you to be prepared for the possibility that your children, when they eventually learn about your will, may claim that Noelle somehow manipulated or influenced you. They may suggest that she cultivated a relationship with you for financial gain. The thought had occurred to me, of course, but hearing it stated so directly still stung. What do you think? I think if that were the case, I would have detected signs of it during today's assessment. People under undue influence typically show specific patterns of confusion, defensiveness, or inconsistent reasoning. You show none of those signs. Your affection for Noelle appears to be based on her genuine care for you, and your decision to include her in your will seems to flow naturally from that relationship. But my children won't see it that way. Probably not, which is why this documentation will be crucial if they choose to contest your will. As I drove home from Portland that afternoon, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that I'd passed the assessment, satisfaction that my reasoning had been validated by a professional, but also a growing awareness of the storm that might be coming. My children, who had shown so little interest in my life while I was alive, might become very interested indeed once I was gone. But there was something else. Something Dr. Patterson had helped me recognize. The relationship with Noelle had become genuinely important to me, not just as a symbol of the care I wasn't receiving from my family, but as a source of joy and connection in its own right. She'd awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. The pleasure of being truly seen and valued by another person. That evening, Noelle arrived for her regularly scheduled visit, and I found myself studying her with new awareness. Was there any hint of calculation in her manner? Any sign that she was investing in our relationship for ulterior motives? But as she moved around my kitchen, preparing my evening medications while telling me about her day with characteristic enthusiasm and humor, I saw only what I'd always seen: genuine warmth, authentic interest. The kind of natural caring that can't be faked convincingly over time. You seem different today, she said, settling into the chair across from me with her usual post-visit cup of tea. More, I don't know, peaceful, maybe? I had some medical appointments today that went well, I said carefully. Sometimes it's reassuring to get professional confirmation that you're thinking clearly. She nodded, assuming I was talking about my Parkinson's management. That's so important. It's easy to doubt yourself when you're dealing with a progressive condition. But from what I can see, you're managing everything beautifully. Noelle, I said impulsively, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What made you choose nursing, especially working with older patients? She was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea thoughtfully. Honestly, I think it was because of Mrs. Rodriguez. Who was she? My last foster mother. I lived with her family from age 16 until I aged out. She was in her 70s then, and she had diabetes. That was getting harder to manage. The whole family was so focused on her limitations, what she couldn't do anymore, what she was costing them in time and energy. Noel's voice grew softer, more reflective. But I saw something different. I saw this incredibly wise woman who had raised 6 children, who could cook like a magician, who knew stories about the neighborhood going back 50 years. She was this treasure trove of experience and knowledge, and everyone around her was treating her like a burden. What did you do? I started spending time with her, really listening to her stories, asking her to teach me things. She showed me how to make tamales from scratch, told me about immigrating to Maine in the 1960s when there were almost no Latino families here. She taught me about resilience and dignity in the face of physical decline. She sounds wonderful. She was. And when she died during my senior year of high school, I knew I wanted to work with older adults. Not just managing their medical needs, but seeing them as whole people with rich histories and ongoing value. I felt something tight in my chest loosen as she spoke. This wasn't someone who viewed elderly patients as sources of potential inheritance. This was someone whose calling grew from genuine respect and affection for older adults. Someone who understood intuitively what my own children had somehow failed to learn, that aging doesn't diminish a person's worth. "Mrs. Rodriguez would have loved you," she said suddenly. "Why? 'Cause you're exactly what she was. Someone who's lived fully and has so much wisdom to share. Someone who deserves to be valued for who you are, not just tolerated because of obligation." That night, after Noelle left, I sat in Gerald's chair by the fireplace and thought about the day's revelations. The cognitive assessment had confirmed what I already knew about my mental clarity. But Noelle's story had confirmed something equally important. My instincts about her character were sound. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman I'd never met, but who had shaped the person now sitting in my kitchen twice a week, bringing light and laughter into my days. How many people had Mrs. Rodriguez influenced without ever knowing it? How many lives had been touched by her wisdom and kindness, rippling outward through time in ways she could never have imagined? The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Laura. She sounded rushed, distracted, calling from her car between meetings. "Mom, I just wanted to check in. How are you feeling? Any changes with your symptoms?" "I'm doing well," I said, puzzled by this sudden concern. "Why do you ask?" "I've been thinking about you, that's all. And I realized it's been a while since we talked." "It's been 3 weeks," I said mildly. "Has it? God, time just flies. Work has been insane, and Marcus and I are looking at apartments together, and—" She trailed off, as if realizing her list of priorities didn't paint her in the best light. "That's nice about the apartment," I said. "Yeah, it's exciting. Listen, Mom, I was thinking maybe I could drive down this weekend. We could have dinner, catch up properly." Something in her tone set off alarm bells. Laura never suggested spontaneous visits, never called just to check in without an agenda. Had Harold mentioned my visit to Dr. Patterson to someone? Had word somehow gotten back to her about my estate planning? "That would be lovely," I said carefully. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I just ... I miss you, Mom. I know I've been distant lately, and I want to make more effort to stay connected." After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, trying to parse the meaning of this sudden change in attention. Was it genuine remorse or something else entirely? And if it was something else, what did that say about my decision to change the will? I decided not to speculate. Instead, I would simply observe. If Laura's renewed interest was sincere, it would show in sustained attention over time, not just a single guilt-motivated visit. And if it wasn't sincere, that would become clear too. Either way, my decision remained unchanged. Love that appears only when inheritance is at stake isn't love at all, it's performance. And after 61 years of life and 2 months of genuine care from someone who expected nothing in return, I finally understood the difference. February arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes you question every life choice that brought you to northern New England, but I found myself feeling warmer and more energized than I had in months. The new will was completed, signed, and filed safely in Harold Peterson's vault. Dr. Patterson's cognitive assessment sat in my filing cabinet like a shield against future challenges. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt truly in control of my own narrative. Laura's visit the previous weekend had been exactly what I'd expected: polite, slightly forced, and filled with a kind of performative attention that felt more like duty than genuine care. She'd complimented the house, asked about my symptoms with clinical interest, and spent most of dinner talking about her work challenges and relationship decisions. When she left Sunday afternoon, promising to be better about staying in touch, I knew I wouldn't hear from her again for weeks unless she needed something. The contrast with Noelle's regular visits had become even more stark. while Lara asked about my medications with the efficiency of someone checking items off a mental to-do list. Noelle noticed when I was having a particularly good day and celebrated it with me, while Lara spoke about her own life as if I were a sounding board rather than a participant in conversation. Noelle asked for my advice and actually listened to the answers. "You seem different lately," Noelle said during her Thursday afternoon visit in early February. "More ... settled, maybe. Less worried." I was seated at the kitchen table watching her organize my medications for the following week. Her movements were efficient but gentle, and she had a habit of humming softly while she worked that I'd grown to find deeply comforting. "I suppose I am more settled," I said. "I've made some decisions recently that feel right. Important decisions about my future." "That's wonderful. It must be such a relief to feel like you have some control over things." If only she knew how much control I'd taken back. "Noelle, can I ask you something?" "Always." "What are your long-term plans? I know you mentioned wanting to become a nurse practitioner, but where do you see yourself in 5 years? 10 years? She paused in her counting of pills, considering the question with the seriousness she brought to everything I asked her. "Honestly, I'd love to open my own practice someday, specializing in geriatric care. Maybe start a program that combines medical care with companionship services, because I think isolation is one of the biggest health threats facing older adults." "That sounds wonderful. And expensive." She laughed, but not bitterly. "Yeah, graduate school alone would be a financial stretch. Never mind starting a practice. But I figure if the dream is important enough, I'll find a way to make it work." "I always have before." "You certainly have. Tell me about that, how you've managed to build such a good life starting from nothing." She finished organizing the pill dispenser before answering, her expression thoughtful. "I think foster care taught me that security has to come from within. Yourself, not from other people or external circumstances. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it." "That's very wise for someone so young. I had good teachers. It's not always the people who were supposed to be teaching me, but," she shrugged, "Ugh. Life has a way of putting the right lessons in front of you if you're paying attention." That evening, after Noel left, I found myself thinking about her words. Life had certainly put lessons in front of me recently. Harsh lessons about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, between obligation and genuine care. But it had also put something beautiful in front of me. This young woman, who understood inherently what my own children had somehow failed to grasp. The irony was almost poetic. My children, who had been raised with every advantage, who had been loved unconditionally and supported through every challenge, had grown into adults who rationed their affection based on convenience. Meanwhile, Noelle, who had been given nothing and abandoned repeatedly, had developed the capacity for generous, authentic caring. February also brought an unexpected development. Milo actually visited. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon without calling first, which was so unlike him that my first thought was that something terrible had happened. But when I opened the door, he looked healthy and calm, though perhaps a bit guilty. "Hi, Mom. I hope it's okay that I just showed up. I was driving back from a conference in Bar Harbor and thought I'd stop by." "Course it's okay. Come in, you must be frozen." We settled in the living room with coffee, and I waited to see what had really prompted this unexpected visit. Milo had always been the most emotionally perceptive of my children, the one who sensed undercurrents and tensions that his sisters missed entirely. If anyone was going to notice the changes in my emotional landscape, it would be him. "You feeling, Mom?" Really feeling? Not just the polite answer you give people. "I'm doing well, honey. Better than I have in months, actually." "Yeah." He studied my face with the careful attention I remembered from his childhood, when he'd been the family barometer for emotional weather. "You do seem ... I don't know. More like yourself. More like the mom I remember from before Dad died." Observation surprised me with its accuracy. "What do you mean? You seem stronger somehow? Less fragile?" For a while there, you seemed like you were just enduring things. Now you seem more engaged with your life. I considered how much to tell him. Of all my children, Milo was the most likely to understand my decisions. But he was also the most likely to try to mediate between me and his sisters if he knew what was coming. I've been making some changes, I said carefully. It's taking more control over my own life instead of just accepting whatever circumstances present themselves. Good for you. Like, what kind of changes? Legal things? Mostly. Making sure my affairs are in order, updating documents that needed updating. He nodded, apparently satisfied with this vague explanation. That's smart. And you're managing okay? Here, by yourself. The house isn't too much. I have help when I need it. The home health agency sends a nurse practitioner twice a week to check on me. She's wonderful, really caring, not just professional. I'm glad I worry about you being isolated out here. Not isolated, Milo. I'm selective. He looked puzzled by this distinction, but before he could ask for clarification, my phone rang. Noelle's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my face brighten involuntarily. Excuse me, honey. I should take this. Mrs. Frank Dew. So sorry to bother you on the weekend, but I wanted to check. You mentioned feeling a bit dizzy yesterday, and I realized I forgot to ask if it was still bothering you. It's fine, dear. No dizziness today at all. Oh, good. I was worried I should have adjusted your medication schedule or suggested you call Dr. Chen. You're very thoughtful to check, but I'm feeling perfectly fine. Actually, my son Milo is visiting, so I'm having a lovely afternoon. That's wonderful. I'll let you get back to your visit. See you Tuesday? Yes, I'll see you Tuesday. When I hung up, Milo was watching me with curious eyes. She calls you on weekends to check on side effects. She's very thorough. And you call her dear? I felt myself flush slightly. We've developed a friendship beyond the professional relationship. She's a lovely person, I can tell. Your whole face lit up when you saw her name on the phone. We spent the rest of the afternoon in comfortable conversation, talking about his work, his relationship with Sarah, his thoughts about the future. But I could sense him filing away observations about my improved mood, my obvious affection for Noelle, the changes in my living situation and emotional state. As he was leaving, he hugged me more tightly than usual. Mom, I want you to know, if you ever need anything at all, you can call me. I know I haven't been as attentive as I should have been since your diagnosis. I'm going to do better. I appreciate that, sweetheart. And Mom, I'm glad you found a friend in your nurse. You seem happier than you've been in a long time. After he left, I stood at the kitchen window watching his taillights disappear down the coastal road, feeling a complex mixture of love and sadness. Milo was a good person, fundamentally kind and well-intentioned. But good intentions expressed too late don't erase months of neglect. And sporadic guilt-motivated attention isn't the same as consistent, genuine care. The following Tuesday, Noelle arrived for her regular visit with an unusual energy about her. She seemed excited about something, practically bouncing as she set up her equipment. I have news, she said, unable to contain her smile. I got accepted into the nurse practitioner program at UMaine. Noelle, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you. I can't quite believe it yet. I've been wanting this for years, but I wasn't sure my grades were competitive enough. And the program is so selective. When does it start? This fall. A 2-year program, and I can do most of it part-time while still working. Which is crucial because I'll need to keep paying rent and, eating. She laughed, but I could hear the underlying anxiety about finances. What about your current job? I'll have to reduce my hours significantly once the clinical rotations start. The agency understands they're actually supportive of employees, advancing their education. But it's going to be tight financially. As she checked my blood pressure and updated my medication chart, she chattered about the program requirements, the coursework she was most excited about, her long-term dreams of specialized practice. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself caught up in her vision of the future. "I'm so proud of you," I said when she finished her clinical tasks. "This is exactly what you should be doing. Thank you. It means so much to have your support. You're one of the only people who's ever really encouraged my professional dreams." "What about your colleagues at the agency?" "They're supportive in a general way, but you're different. You ask about my goals like they matter, like they're actually achievable. Most people just say things like, 'That's nice,' or 'Good luck with that,' but you engage with the details. You make me feel like my ambitions are valid." After she left that afternoon, I sat in the living room thinking about our conversation. Noelle was about to embark on a challenging educational journey that would position her to help countless older adults over the course of her career. The tuition alone would be a significant financial burden, never mind the reduced income during her clinical training. That evening, I called Harold Peterson. "Harold, I'd like to add a codicil to my will." "What kind of codicil?" "I want to establish an immediate trust fund for Noelle's education. Something that would cover her tuition and living expenses while she's in the nurse practitioner program." "Kostya, that's a significant sum of money to give to someone while you're still alive. Are you certain about this?" "I'm certain." She got accepted into the program she's been dreaming about, and I have the resources to help her achieve that dream. Why should she struggle financially when I could easily prevent that struggle? What about your own financial security? You may live for many more years, and your medical expenses could increase significantly. Harold, I've run the numbers. Even after establishing this trust, I'll have more than enough to maintain my current lifestyle and cover any reasonable medical expenses. The money will do more good helping her now than sitting in my accounts earning interest." There was a long pause. "Okay, are you planning to tell her about this gift?" "Not right away. Want to set it up as a surprise. Maybe have the trust contact her directly about the availability of educational funding." "And you're certain this isn't about influencing her feelings toward you?" "Harold, she doesn't know about the will. She has no idea she stands to inherit anything from me. This gift is completely separate from that. It's simply about helping someone I care about achieve their dreams." Another pause. "All right, I'll draft the paperwork for the trust. Kostya, I want you to think carefully about the timing of this revelation. These kinds of financial gifts can change relationships in unexpected ways. I understand that. But Harold, I've spent the last 40 years giving my resources to people who took them for granted. For once, I'd like to give to someone who will truly value the opportunity." That night, I lay in bed thinking about the decision I just made. Was I being impulsive, allowing my affection for Noelle to override good judgment? Or was I finally learning to use my resources in a way that reflected my values and priorities? I thought about all the money I'd spent on my children over the years. Laura's law school tuition, the down payment I'd helped Milo make on his house, the countless emergency funds I'd provided to Tessa for her various ventures. None of that financial support had created lasting gratitude or stronger relationships. If anything, it had enabled them to take my generosity for granted. But Noelle's situation was different. She wasn't asking for help. She was working toward her goals with or without support. She had a clear plan, genuine need, and the character to use assistance wisely. Most importantly, she had already shown me authentic care and respect before any prospect of financial benefit existed. I was giving her this gift not because I expected anything in return, but because she had already given me something precious. The restoration of my faith that genuine human connection was still possible. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork and financial arrangements. Harold worked with impressive efficiency to establish the trust, and by mid-March, everything was in place. The trust would provide Noelle with full tuition coverage plus a generous living stipend for the duration of her program. She would receive notice of the funding availability within the week. As I waited for that notification to reach her, I found myself both excited and nervous. How would she react? Would she accept the help gracefully, or would she feel uncomfortable receiving such a significant gift? Would it change our relationship in positive ways? Or would it introduce an awkward dynamic that might damage the natural connection we developed? On the Thursday morning when I expected her to receive the trust notification, I could barely contain my anticipation. When she arrived for her regular visit, I studied her face carefully, looking for signs that she'd received life-changing news. But she seemed exactly the same as always: warm, professional, genuinely happy to see me. She went through her usual routine, checking my vitals and organizing medications, chatting about her week with her characteristic enthusiasm. "Any interesting mail lately?" I asked casually as she finished updating my chart. "Just the usual bills and junk mail. Oh, and a letter from the nursing program with more details about course schedules." "Why?" "Just curious. Sometimes important things arrive when you least expect them." She laughed. "That's true. Although in my experience, most unexpected mail is either bills or bad news, so I've learned not to get too excited about the mailbox." When she left an hour later, I was puzzled. The trust letter should have arrived by now. Had there been a delay in the mail, a mistake in the address? That evening, my phone rang. Noelle's name appeared on the screen, and I answered quickly, expecting to hear excitement and gratitude in her voice. Instead, I heard confusion and concern. "Sorry to bother you, but I received the strangest letter today, and I thought you might be able to help me understand it." My heart began to race. "What kind of letter?" "It's from some kind of trust fund, saying I've been selected to receive educational funding for my nurse practitioner program. Full tuition plus living expenses." But I never applied for anything like this, and I can't figure out how they even knew I'd been accepted into the program. I closed my eyes, realizing that I'd been naive about how she might react to anonymous generosity. Of course, she'd be suspicious rather than simply grateful. She was too intelligent and had been disappointed too many times to accept something that seemed too good to be true. "That does sound strange," I said carefully. "What does the letter say exactly?" "It's very official looking, from something called the Coastal Educational Trust. They say they provide funding for healthcare workers pursuing advanced degrees, and that my application materials were referred to them by..." Well, it doesn't say by whom. The whole thing feels like it might be a scam, except the contact information looks legitimate, and they're not asking for any money or personal information. Perhaps you should call them and ask for more details. I suppose I should. It's just, things like this don't happen to people like me, you know. I keep waiting for the catch, for them to tell me I need to pay some kind of processing fee or provide my social security number to Nigerian princes or something. "Noelle," I said gently, "what if it's real? What if someone genuinely wants to help you achieve your educational goals?" "Then I'd be the luckiest person in Maine," she said with a shaky laugh. But I learned a long time ago not to count on luck. Usually when something seems too good to be true, it is. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling the first stirrings of doubt about my decision. I'd wanted to give Noelle a wonderful surprise, but instead I'd created confusion and suspicion. Her wariness was completely understandable given her history, but it broke my heart to think that life had taught her to be afraid of generosity. The next few days were difficult. Noelle did call the trust office, and Harold's staff handled her questions with professional discretion, confirming that the offer was legitimate while maintaining the anonymity of the donor. But I could see during her visits that she remained troubled by the mystery, spending our conversations analyzing possible explanations for this unexpected windfall. "I keep thinking about that trust fund," she said during her Tuesday visit. "I called them again yesterday, and they confirmed that it's real, that they'll actually pay my tuition and expenses for the entire program. But they won't tell me who nominated me or how they learned about my acceptance." "Does it matter?" I asked. "If the funding is legitimate and will help you achieve your dreams, does the source really matter? I guess I'm worried about strings attached. What if whoever is funding this expects something from me that I can't or won't provide? What if they think they're buying my loyalty or I don't know. My gratitude in some specific way? Her concern cut deep because it was so perceptive. I was expecting her gratitude in a sense, not as payment for the gift, but as confirmation that I'd chosen wisely, that she truly was the caring person I believed her to be. Noelle, I said carefully, what if the person funding your education simply believes in your potential and wants to help you succeed? What if they expect nothing more than for you to use the opportunity? Well, that would be wonderful, she said softly. But I've learned to be cautious about people's motives. Foster care taught me that gifts usually come with expectations, and those expectations aren't always spelled out clearly at the beginning. I wanted desperately to tell her the truth, to reveal that the gift came from someone who already knew. Her character, who had already received more from her than money could repay. But I also understood that the revelation might create its own complications, might change our relationship in ways that neither of us could predict. So I made a decision that surprised me. I chose to let her struggle with the uncertainty to see how she would handle this windfall when she didn't know its source. Her response would tell me everything I needed to know about whether my larger decision, the will, was as sound as I believed it to be. I think I said finally that you should accept the funding and use it to become the best nurse practitioner. Sometimes the universe provides exactly what we need, and our job is simply to receive it gracefully and make good use of it. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. Probably overthinking this because I'm not used to good things happening without a price. Maybe it's time I learned to accept help when it's offered genuinely. I think that would be very wise. As March moved toward April, I watched Noelle gradually accept the reality of her good fortune. She submitted the paperwork to secure her funding, began planning her transition to part-time work, and started shopping for textbooks with the excitement of someone whose dreams were finally becoming achievable. But more importantly, I watched how she handled the mystery. She didn't become entitled or demanding. She didn't spend our visits speculating about the identity of her benefactor or trying to manipulate me into revealing information I might have. Instead, she simply expressed gratitude for the opportunity and focused on preparing to make the most of it. Her reaction confirmed what I'd already known. She was exactly the kind of person who deserved support, and exactly the kind of person who would use that support to help others in turn. As I prepared for the final phase of my quiet revolution, I felt more certain than ever that my decisions had been correct. My children had shown me their priorities through their absence. Noelle had shown me her character through her presence. The will I'd written reflected those realities. And the educational trust had been a successful trial run for the larger gift that awaited her. All that remained was to let my story unfold naturally, trusting that time would reveal the wisdom of my choices to anyone who cared enough to pay attention. By late spring, my world had settled into a rhythm that felt both peaceful and purposeful. The coastal town was coming alive with the promise of summer, and I found myself appreciating each day with a clarity that illness had paradoxically given me. My hands shook more now, and my balance required careful attention, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. Focused by the knowledge that time was precious and should not be wasted on relationships that drained rather than sustained me. Noelle had officially started her nurse practitioner program and reduced her visits to once a week. But the quality of our time together had only deepened. She would arrive on Thursday afternoons full of enthusiasm about her coursework, eager to share what she was learning and to ask my advice about clinical situations that puzzled her. Our professional relationship had evolved into something more, like mentorship with genuine friendship woven throughout. I can't believe how much I'm learning, she said during one of her May visits, settling into what had become her usual chair at my kitchen table. Yesterday we had a lecture on geriatric psychiatry, and the professor was talking about how isolation and lack of purpose can mimic dementia symptoms in older adults. I kept thinking about you, actually. Why? because you're such a perfect example of someone who's maintained emotional and intellectual vitality despite physical challenges. The professor was saying that social connection and having a sense of purpose are some of the most important factors in successful aging. And you have both of those things. I smiled at her assessment, thinking about how different my sense of purpose was now compared to 6 months ago. Then I'd been drifting, defined by my illness and my children's neglect. Now I felt actively engaged in shaping my own narrative. What gives you a sense of purpose, Noelle? This, she said without hesitation. Learning how to provide better care, building relationships with patients who trust me with their stories, feeling like I'm making a difference in people's lives. And you've been such an important part of that journey, Mrs. Frank-Du. You've shown me what patient care should really look like, not just managing symptoms, but seeing the whole person. You already knew that before you met me. Maybe intuitively, but you've helped me understand it practically. The way you've maintained your dignity and independence, the way you've adapted to changes without losing your essential self, that's what I want to help my future patients achieve. That evening, after Noelle left, I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and rose. The conversation had stirred something in me. A recognition that our relationship had become more than I'd initially realized. She wasn't just providing me with care and companionship. I was apparently providing her with professional insight and inspiration. We were, in the truest sense, helping each other grow. It was in this reflective mood that I decided to write the letter. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, knowing that someday my children would discover the truth about my will and would demand explanations I wouldn't be alive to provide. They would be angry, confused, probably hurt, and they would inevitably conclude that I'd been manipulated or had lost my mental capacity. The letter would be my final opportunity to explain my reasoning in my own words, to help them understand that my decisions had come from clarity rather than confusion. I started writing on a Thursday evening in late May, sitting at the kitchen table where I'd once helped them with homework, where we'd shared countless family meals, where I'd listened to their problems and celebrated their successes for decades. The irony of writing about their abandonment in the same place where I'd once nurtured their dreams was not lost on me. My dear children, I began, then stopped, wondering if they deserved that endearment anymore. But they were still my children, regardless of how they'd chosen to behave. And I was still their mother, even if they'd forgotten what that should mean. I wrote about my diagnosis and their gradual disappearance from my life. I wrote about the missed holidays and unreturned phone calls, about the feeling of becoming invisible to the people who had once been the center of my world. I wrote about Noelle and how her genuine care had showed me the difference between obligation and authentic relationship. I want you to understand, I wrote, that this decision was not made in anger or disappointment, though I have felt both of those emotions during this process. This decision was made in recognition of what love actually looks like, and in gratitude for someone who provided that love when I needed it most. The letter took me several evenings to complete. Written in careful longhand that accommodated my tremor but preserved the personal nature of my final communication with them, I explained. The educational trust, the cognitive assessment, the months of careful consideration that had gone into my choice. I tried to help them understand that their inheritance hadn't been taken away. They had simply never shown that they valued it enough to maintain the relationship that should have accompanied it. Noelle didn't ask for anything, I wrote in conclusion. She simply gave everything: her time, her attention, her genuine care for my well-being. She treated me like a person whose thoughts and experiences mattered, who had value beyond my utility to others. That kind of treatment should not be rare or precious, but in my experience with you, it had become both. I am leaving my estate to someone who understood its true value before she knew it existed. I sealed the letter in an envelope marked for Laura, Milo, and Tessa, and placed it in my bedroom safe. Along with copies of my medical records, Dr. Patterson's cognitive assessment, and Harold Peterson's detailed documentation of my legal competency. When the time came, Harold would deliver everything to them together, creating a complete picture of my mental state and decision-making process. The act of writing the letter felt liberating, like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for months. I'd said what needed to be said, explained what needed explaining, and made peace with the consequences of my choices. What I didn't expect was how writing the letter would affect my relationship with Noelle. During her next visit, she seemed to sense something different about my mood. I felt lighter, more settled, as if I'd completed important business. She commented on it while checking my blood pressure. "You seem very peaceful today. More so than usual, even." "I am peaceful. I've been taking care of some final details, putting my affairs in order. It feels good to have everything settled." "Final details?" Her voice carried a note of concern. "Are you feeling worse? Is there something wrong that you haven't told me?" I realized how my words must have sounded to someone in the healthcare field where putting affairs in order was often code for preparing for death. "No, dear, nothing like that. I just mean updating legal documents, making sure my wishes are clearly documented. The kind of paperwork everyone should keep current, but most people avoid until it becomes urgent." She nodded, though I could see she was still slightly worried. "Very responsible. A lot of people don't want to think about those things." I've found that facing difficult topics head-on is usually less stressful than avoiding them. "That's true, although sometimes I think you're a little too matter-of-fact about serious subjects, such as, well, like your diagnosis. You talk about your symptoms and prognosis the way other people talk about the weather. It's admirable, but I sometimes wonder if you're processing the emotional impact of everything you're dealing with." Observation caught me off guard. I'd prided myself on handling my illness with dignity and realism, but perhaps I'd swung too far towards stoicism. "I think I've processed it quite thoroughly," I said. "Enough to make peace with what I can't control and take action on what I can." "What kind of action?" I hesitated, wanting to share something of my journey without revealing the full scope of my decisions. I've learned to distinguish between people who add value to my life and people who subtract from it. And I've started making choices based on that distinction. That sounds healthy. It is. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living according to my own values rather than just reacting to other people's expectations. What changed? What made you realize you needed to make those distinctions? I thought about how to answer truthfully without saying too much. I think illness has a way of clarifying what really matters. When your time and energy become limited, you stop wasting them on relationships that don't nourish you. That makes sense? Although it must be painful when some of those relationships are with family. Her insight was uncomfortably accurate. Sometimes the most painful truths are also the most liberating ones. We were quiet for a moment, both lost in our own thoughts. Then Noelle surprised me by reaching across the table and briefly covering my hand with hers. "Mrs. Frankdew, I want you to know how much our friendship has meant to me. Not just professionally, but personally. You've taught me so much about resilience and grace, and I'm grateful every day that I was assigned to your case." "I'm grateful too," I said, my voice thick with emotion I hadn't expected to feel so strongly. "You've given me something precious, Noelle. You've reminded me what it feels like to be truly seen and valued." "You are valued," she said firmly. "By me, absolutely, but also by other people who might not express it as clearly as they should." She was thinking of my children, of course, trying to comfort me without criticizing them directly. Her kindness in that moment, her attempt to preserve my feelings about family relationships that had clearly disappointed me, only reinforced my certainty that she deserved everything I was planning to give her. That night, I called Harold Peterson. One final time. "Harold, I want to make sure everything is in order. The will, the trust documentation, the letter for my children, is it all properly executed and filed?" "Everything is complete and legally sound, Castilla." Your cognitive assessment is on file. Your intentions are clearly documented. And your letter provides a thoughtful explanation of your reasoning. Are you having second thoughts? No second thoughts. I just wanted to make sure there are no loose ends. There aren't. When the time comes, everything will proceed exactly as you've specified. Good and Harold. Thank you for helping me through this process. I know my decisions have been unconventional. They've been thoughtful and deliberate, he corrected. And frankly, they've been a reminder of why I became a lawyer in the first place, to help people protect what matters most to them. What matters most to me is making sure my resources go to someone who understands their true value. I think you've accomplished that. As June arrived and the Maine coast settled into the rhythm of summer, I found myself thinking often about legacy, not just the material legacy I would leave behind, but the lessons my story might teach about love, loyalty, and the courage to make difficult choices my children had taught me. Unintentionally, that blood relationships don't guarantee lasting connection. That being family isn't enough if it's not accompanied by genuine care and attention. Noelle had taught me that authentic relationships can develop quickly when they're based on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's well-being. Together, they had taught me that I had more control over my own story than I'd realized, and that it was never too late to make choices that reflected my values rather than other people's expectations. The woman who had once begged for crumbs of attention from her children had become someone who could quietly, decisively reclaim her own worth. The mother who had sacrificed everything for family had learned to recognize when sacrifice was no longer reciprocated or appreciated. The patient who had been abandoned by her own children had found family in an unexpected place. As I sat in my garden on a particularly beautiful June evening, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the water as it had for decades, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone whose story was complete. Not finished, I hoped to have months or even years ahead of me, but complete in the sense that all the essential elements were in place. My children would eventually understand what they had lost through their neglect, and that understanding would be its own education. Noelle would eventually discover the full extent of my gratitude for her care, and that discovery would give her the resources to help countless others. My story would serve as both warning and inspiration, a reminder that love must be tended like a garden, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's carelessness with your heart. The tide was coming in. It did twice every day, reliable and eternal. Unlike my family relationships, it never disappointed, never made excuses, never took me for granted. There was wisdom in that rhythm, in the ocean's quiet insistence on its own worth and purpose. I had finally learned to be like the tide, constant in my values, reliable in my integrity, and absolutely unwilling to be taken for granted by anyone who didn't value what I had to offer. August arrived with a kind of perfect Maine weather that makes you forget winter ever existed. The garden was in full bloom. My tomatoes heavy on the vine, and the harbor seals had returned to their favorite rocks just offshore. I was having one of my better days, my hands steady enough to work in the garden for nearly an hour before the tremor became bothersome. Noelle found me there when she arrived for her Thursday visit, sitting on the garden bench I'd positioned to catch the afternoon sun, reading a mystery novel while keeping one eye on the seals. "This is a perfect spot," she said, settling beside me on the bench. "I can see why you love spending time out here. It's been my sanctuary for 40 years. I said, "Gerald and I used to sit here after dinner sometimes, planning improvements to the house, or just watching the water change colors as the sun went down. Do you miss him more now, being sick?" It was the kind of direct question that might have felt intrusive from someone else, but Noelle had earned the right to ask about the deeper aspects of my experience. "I miss his steadiness," I said after considering. Gerald was the kind of person who showed up no matter what. He would have been magnificent during this illness, not dramatic or overly emotional, just reliably present. The children don't take after him in that way. "No," I said simply, "they don't." We sat quietly for a moment, watching a pair of gulls argue over something they'd found in the shallows. Then Noelle surprised me by pulling out her phone. "You mind if I took a picture of us? I know that might sound silly, but I'd like to have a photo to remember this afternoon. You look so peaceful and the garden is beautiful and ... She trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. "I guess I just want to remember what contentment looks like." "Course," I said, pleased by the request. "Though I'm not sure I'm very photogenic these days." "You're beautiful," she said matter-of-factly. And I felt tears prick my eyes at the simple sincerity of it. She took several photos of us together. Our heads bent close as we looked at the harbor, both of us laughing at something silly she'd said about the argumentative gulls. In one picture, she'd captured me with my hand on her arm, a gesture of affection that felt as natural as breathing. "These are perfect," she said, scrolling through the images. "I'm going to print one for my refrigerator." "I'd like a copy too," I said. "It's been a long time since I had a photo that made me look happy." That evening, after Noelle left, I found myself thinking about happiness, about how it had evolved for me over the past year. The desperate, anxious happiness I'd once felt when my children paid attention to me had been replaced by something much steadier. The quiet satisfaction of living according to my own values, of nurturing relationships that nurtured me in return. I no longer waited for my phone to ring or checked my email, hoping for messages from Laura, Milo, or Tessa. Their sporadic communications, brief texts about their busy lives. Phone calls that felt obligatory rather than loving no longer had the power to lift or destroy my mood. I'd achieved something I'd never thought possible: emotional independence from the people I'd once believed defined my worth as a mother and a person. The transformation had been so gradual that I'd barely noticed it happening. But sitting in the garden that evening, I realized how fundamentally my life had changed. I wasn't angry with my children anymore. I was simply done waiting for them to become the people I'd hoped they would be. September brought the first hints of fall color. And with it, an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen making soup when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Tessa getting out of a rental car, looking around the property with the expression of someone returning to a place that felt foreign despite its familiarity. I hadn't seen her in person in over a year, and the change was striking. She'd cut her long hair into a severe bob, and her California tan couldn't quite hide the stress lines around her eyes. She looked older somehow, and less sure of herself than the confident young woman who'd left Maine 5 years earlier. "Mom," she called out as she approached the door, her voice carrying the forced enthusiasm I remembered from childhood. When she was trying to deflect attention from something she'd done wrong, I opened the door before she could knock, studying her face for clues about what had prompted this unexpected visit. "Tessa, what a surprise. I know I should have called first, but I was on the East Coast for work, and I thought, well, I realized it's been way too long since I've seen you." She hugged me, and I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like someone bracing for impact. "Come in, sweetheart. Are you hungry?" "I was just making soup." "That sounds perfect." We settled in the kitchen, and I watched her take in the small changes I'd made over the past year. The new curtains, the rearranged furniture, the photos I'd removed from prominent display. Her eyes lingered on the empty spaces where family pictures had once hung. "The house looks different," she said carefully. "I've been simplifying, getting rid of things I don't need anymore." "Like what?" "Oh, just clutter. Do you know how it accumulates over the years?" She nodded, though I could see she was puzzled by the changes. The house felt less like a shrine to family memories and more like a place where an individual lived her own life. And Tessa was clearly registering the shift. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Really? I'm well. The progression has been slower than the doctors initially predicted. And I've learned to manage the symptoms quite effectively. That's good. I've been worried about you, especially after Lara mentioned that you seemed ... different when she visited." "Different how?" "More independent, I guess. Less ... needy." She flushed as she said it, realizing how it sounded. I was never needy, Tessa. I was lonely. There's a difference. I know I didn't mean. I just meant that Laura said you seemed less interested in having us visit more often. We're okay with. Being by yourself, I am more okay with it. I've learned to enjoy my own company, and I've developed other relationships that provide companionship when I want it. What kind of relationships? Friends, neighbors. My nurse practitioner has become a good friend that's nice. She seemed uncertain how to respond to the idea that I'd built a social life. It didn't revolve around waiting for my children's attention. We talked for an hour about her life in California. Her latest business venture, organic pet treats, apparently. Her on-and-off relationship with a photographer named Marcus. Not the same Marcus that Laura was dating, she clarified, as if I'd been keeping track. She seemed unsettled by my responses to her stories, interested but not anxious, supportive but not worried about her financial stability or romantic choices. You seem really calm, she said finally, like unusually calm. Is that a problem? No, it's just different. You used to be more invested in our problems, I guess. Still interested in your lives, sweetheart. But I've learned that being invested in someone else's problems doesn't actually help them solve those problems. And it can be quite draining for the person doing the investing. She looked hurt by this observation, though she tried to hide it. I never thought of it as draining. Of course you didn't. Why would you? But consider this from my perspective. I spent years worrying about things I couldn't control. Offering advice that wasn't taken, providing financial help that didn't create lasting stability. That kind of investment takes a toll when it's not reciprocated with genuine effort or lasting change. So you just stopped caring? I stopped depleting myself. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long time, staring into her soup bowl. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Mom, I know I haven't been the best daughter, especially since you got sick. I've been dealing with my own stuff, and I know. That's not an excuse. But, Tessa, I said gently, you don't need to apologize. You've been living your life exactly as you chose to live it. I've simply learned to do the same. But I want to do better. I want to be more involved, more supportive. I've been thinking about moving back to Maine, actually. Being closer to family. I felt a familiar tug of hope, quickly followed by a more rational assessment of what this offer likely meant. Tessa's sudden desire to be closer to family probably had more to do with her latest venture, failing and needing a place to regroup, than with genuine concern for my well-being. That's an interesting idea, I said neutrally. What's prompting the consideration? I miss home. I miss having family around. And I think you might need more support as your condition progresses. I appreciate the thought, but I'm managing quite well. I have good medical care, friends who check on me, everything I need. But wouldn't it be nice to have family nearby? Someone who really knows you. The irony of this statement was almost overwhelming. Tessa thought she knew me, but she'd been essentially absent from my life for 5 years. The person who really knew me now, who remembered my stories, understood my values, cared about my daily experience, was Noelle, I think. I said carefully. That family is about more than proximity. And knowing someone requires ongoing attention to who they are, not just memory of who they used to be. She flinched at this gentle rebuke. That's fair. I know I haven't been paying enough attention, but I could learn. I could do better. You could, I agreed. But Tessa, I'm not going to rearrange my life around the possibility that you might change. I spent too many years doing that, waiting for people to become the family members I needed them to be. So what does that mean? It means that if you want to move back to Maine, you should do it because it's right for your life, not because you think I need caretaking. And if you want to rebuild our relationship, you should do it gradually, through consistent effort over time, not through dramatic gestures or promises about the future. She nodded slowly, though I could see she was struggling with my refusal to be enthusiastic about her sudden interest in being a more involved daughter. "Can I ask you something?" "Mom, of course. Are you angry with us? It's with me and Laura and Milo?" I considered the question seriously. I was angry for a while, but anger requires too much energy, and I decided to spend that energy on relationships that actually sustain me, like with your nurse friend. Among others, yes. What's she like? She's kind, intelligent, genuinely interested in other people's lives. She asks questions and remembers the answers. She shows up when she says she will. She treats me like a person whose thoughts and experiences matter. Tessa was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing the implicit criticism. "In my description of Noelle's qualities, I used to be like that," she said finally. "When I was younger, I remember asking you about your gallery, about the artists you worked with. I remember being excited about your stories. You did. You were a curious, engaged child. What happened to that? To us? You grew up and became focused on your own lives, which is normal and healthy, to a point. But somewhere along the way, you stopped making room for the people who helped create the foundation for those lives. How do we fix it?" "I'm not sure we do," I said honestly. "Some things can't be fixed, Tessa. They can only be learned from." She stayed for dinner, and we talked more about neutral topics, books, movies, memories from her childhood that felt safe and nostalgic. But the conversation had shifted something between us, clarified boundaries that had been blurry for too long. When she left the next morning, promising to stay in better touch, I felt neither hopeful nor disappointed. I simply felt clear about what our relationship was and what it wasn't, and comfortable with both. That afternoon, Noelle arrived for her weekly visit to find me sitting in the garden with the photo she'd taken of us the week before. I had it printed, I said, showing her the 8x10 image. "It captures something wonderful. It really does. We both look so happy." "We are happy. At least I am. Are you?" "With you. Always. With my life in general." "Most of the time. The program is challenging but rewarding, and having the financial support has made such a difference. I can actually focus on learning instead of worrying about how to pay for groceries." "I'm glad. Mrs. Frankdew, can I tell you something?" "Always." "You've changed my understanding of what it means to age well. Before I met you, I thought successful aging was just about maintaining physical function and avoiding major illness. But you've shown me that it's really about maintaining your sense of self, your capacity for growth and new relationships." It's very kind. "It's not kind. It's true. You've adapted to your diagnosis without losing who you are. You've maintained your independence while accepting help when you need it. You've continued to form new friendships and interests. That's what I want for all my future patients." "And what do you want for yourself, Noelle?" "I want to build a life that matters. It's a practice that serves people who really need care. Relationships that are genuine and mutual. Financial security that lets me help others. I want to make choices based on my values rather than just reacting to circumstances. That sounds like a wonderful life. I learned how to want those things from watching you create them." As October arrived with its spectacular display of fall colors, I found myself reflecting on the full arc of the year's journey. 12 months earlier, I'd been a woman defined by other people's expectations and limitations, depleted by the effort of maintaining relationships that didn't sustain me. In return, now I was someone who had reclaimed agency over my own story, who had learned to distinguish between love and obligation, who had created a life that reflected my values rather than other people's convenience. The changes in my health had been manageable, the progression of symptoms slower than predicted. But more importantly, the changes in my emotional and social life had been transformative. I discovered that family could be chosen as well as inherited. That loyalty was a two-way street, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's neglect. My children continue to live their lives largely without me. checking in sporadically with the kind of minimal effort that salved their consciences without actually changing anything. But their absence no longer created a void in my daily experience. Instead, their reduced presence had made room for relationships that actually enhanced my life. As I sat in my garden on a particularly beautiful October afternoon, watching the last of the season's harbor seals prepare for their winter migration, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone whose story had found its proper shape. Not the ending I hoped for many more chapters, but the resolution of its central conflicts. I had been a woman abandoned by the people who should have valued me most. And I had become a woman who understood her own worth deeply enough to share it with someone who truly appreciated it. I had been someone who begged for crumbs of attention, and I had become someone who created abundance for others. The will remained my secret. The final chapter of a story that wouldn't be fully revealed until after I was gone. But the education trust had already begun to change Noelle's life, queuing her the resources to build the career she'd dreamed of, to help countless other people who needed the kind of care she'd shown me. When that final chapter was eventually revealed, my children would have to reckon with the consequences of their choices. They would learn that love requires tending, that relationships need consistent nourishment, that taking people for granted eventually comes with a price. Perhaps they would grow from that lesson, or perhaps they would simply be angry and bitter. Either way, it would no longer be my responsibility to manage their emotions or excuse their behavior. Noelle would discover that genuine kindness creates its own rewards, that treating people with dignity and respect opens doors to possibilities she'd never imagined. She would have the resources to build the life she wanted, to serve others the way she'd served me, to create her own family of choice based on love and mutual care, and I would have the peace of knowing that my legacy reflected my values. That my story ended with generosity rather than resentment, that I'd managed to transform pain into purpose and abandonment into clarity, as the sun set over the harbor on that October evening, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. I felt complete, not finished, but complete, ready for whatever time remained, secure in the knowledge that I'd made choices that honored both my heart and my dignity. The tide was coming in, as it always did, reliable and eternal. And for the first time in years, I felt myself to be equally reliable, equally constant in my own worth and purpose. I had finally learned to be like the ocean, vast enough to be generous, strong enough to be selective, and absolutely unwilling to apologize for either quality. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.